Every conversation about Africa entering the modern age, the AI factories, the EV plants, the cloud regions, the data centers, runs into one question. Where does the power come from? A single hyperscale data center draws as much electricity as a mid-sized city. An EV assembly plant runs around the clock. AI training clusters can pull tens of megawatts on a busy day. And the African grid, until recently, was famous for one thing: not having enough. Last year, Africa added 11.3 gigawatts of new renewable capacity, triple the previous year. The continental target is 300 gigawatts by 2030. The question isn't whether Africa can power its modern age. The question is whether the continent's power build-out can keep pace with the demand that the modern age is creating. Welcome back to Mbuni. I'm Jennifer, and this is a show about Africa entering the modern age. Today's deep dive, the power question. We'll cover the renewable surge that almost no one saw coming, the African operators quietly running the largest pay-as-you-go solar business model on Earth, Mission 300, and the hard question of whether grid scale can match AI scale in real time. Stick around to the end for your move. The signal. 3 stories from the week. 1. The World Bank and the African Development Bank Joint Mission 300 initiative just hit a major implementation milestone. The headline target: connect 300 million Africans to electricity by 2030. The unlock is that 12 African heads of state have now signed national compacts, meaning concrete public commitments with timelines and accountability mechanisms. Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, Nigeria, Zambia, and several others are leading. This is the first time on the African continent has had an electrification plan with this level of state-level coordination. 2. Sun King. The solar home systems company that operates heavily across East Africa closed another round of growth capital, deepening its operations across Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Nigeria. The company now serves more than 50 million people, and the round itself tells a story. Sun King closed it partly because the founders sit inside Western Capital Pipeline, Stanford Networks, Silicon Valley investors, development finance institutions in London and Washington. That access is the reason a solar company built for African customers gets funded to 50 million users. Meanwhile, African native-founded competitors in the same category get stuck in Series A. This is what happens when the money for African infrastructure lives outside of Africa. We'll come back to that in the deep dive. 3. South Africa's renewable energy build-out crossed the threshold. New solar and wind capacity additions are now outpacing planned coal-fired expansion. And Eskom, the national utility, is restructuring around it. The country that was once the symbol of African grid failure 5 years ago is now becoming the symbol of African grid transformation. 3 stories, same direction. The power build-out isn't a plan anymore. It's a build. If you want all 3 stories in your inbox by tomorrow morning with the sources and the company links, sign up for the Mbuni Signal. There's a link in the show notes. The deep dive. The power question. The scale of what got built. Let me put the numbers in context because the headline figure 11.3 gigawatts in a year only lands if you know what it's measured against. For most of the last decade, Africa added roughly 3 to 4 gigawatts of new generation capacity per year. Tripling that in 2025 is not marginal improvement. It's a phase change. 322 energy projects announced across the continent last year. More than half of them, over 170, were solar. Wind, geothermal, and hydro made most of the rest. Coal and gas made a steadily shrinking share. And that shrinkage is accelerating. The continental target set in the Nairobi Declaration on Climate during the African Climate Summit is 300 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the equivalent of the entire current installed capacity of Germany and France combined. Africa is targeting that build in 5 years, on top of what already exists. A few things that are driving this all at once. Solar prices kept falling. The cost of utility scale solar in Africa has dropped by more than 70% in a decade. And it's now consistently cheaper than new coal even before policy support. Mobile money infrastructure, the M-POPA generation of payment systems, turned out to be the unlock for distributed solar financing. African consumers can pay for solar home systems in micro installments via mobile, which makes the entire pay-as-you-go solar business model possible at scale. That payment infrastructure didn't exist anywhere in the world 10 years ago. And it's why African solar companies are operating with playbooks that the rest of the world is going to copy. And the African Union, the African Development Bank, and several national governments aligned around a coordinated industrial policy push for renewables. Not just for climate reasons, but for sovereignty reasons. A grid powered by imported fossil fuels means your economy is at the mercy of global commodity prices and shipping lanes. A grid powered by your own sun and wind is by definition sovereign. The people running this. I want to start this section with a hard truth about African energy access. The largest, most funded, most covered companies delivering solar-powered African homes right now, the ones that show up in Bloomberg profiles and Time magazine's most influential, are almost all foreign-founded and foreign-owned. M-KOPA, Sun King, BBOXX, d.light, Husk Power, every one of them. That's not because Africans can't build solar companies. It's because for most of the last 15 years, Africans couldn't get funded to build them. Let me explain what that actually looks like. Energy infrastructure requires enormous upfront capital, not lifestyle app money, real money. $20, $50, $100 million just to reach operational scale. For most of the 2010s, that kind of capital came exclusively from Western development finance institutions, European climate funds, Silicon Valley venture funds. Every one of those pools of money required cap tables structured to their standards, financial reportings to their formats, and quietly but consistently, founders they were comfortable with. founders who had gone to Stanford or Imperial College, founders they could take to boards at the World Bank and DFC without a translation layer. The result? Sun King was founded at Stanford in 2007 by non-African engineers. It now serves more than 50 million people across Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Nigeria, Mozambique. M-KOPA was founded in Nairobi by co-founders of Canadian, British, and US origins. It now has more than 5 million paying customers across 4 countries and one of the largest asset finance companies for working class customers anywhere in the world. BBOXX was founded at Imperial College London by British and Belgian engineers. It's now the productive use platform layering solar, electric cooking, and irrigation across Rwanda, the DRC, Togo, and Kenya. d.light, also Stanford founded. Husk Power Systems, Indian founded, running hundreds of mini grids across Nigeria and the DRC, Tanzania, and Madagascar. These companies are real. They serve real African customers. They employ tens of thousands of Africans in management, sales, engineering, field operations. They pay taxes to African governments. They deliver electricity to homes that would otherwise be still running on kerosene. All of that matters, and it should be said. But what should also be said is that the equity value being created from the wealth from an eventual exit flows overwhelmingly in shareholders in London, San Francisco, Tokyo, and Washington. The valuable customer data sets, some of the largest working class consumer data sets on earth, are owned by foreign controlled companies. The strategic decisions get made in boardrooms where African stakeholders don't hold the majority vote. This is what happens when a continent's infrastructure gets built with someone else's capital. African-owned energy operators do exist. They're smaller and less covered, but they're catching up fast because African capital is finally beginning to flow. Salfa Energy in Nigeria, founded by Sandra Chukwudozie, solar home systems distributed nationally, growing quickly, entirely Nigerian owned. Arnergy, also Nigerian, founded by Femi Adeyemo, commercial and industrial solar for businesses, hospitals, and telecom towers. RenSource Energy, Nigerian, founded by Ademola Edesina, hybrid solar mini grids, specifically for markets and small businesses. These are the companies most Western publications won't cover on a magazine this year, but likely will in 5. And on the state side, operators are quietly running some of the largest energy transitions on Earth. KenGen, the Kenya Electricity Generating Company, state-owned and publicly listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. KenGen has spent 2 decades building geothermal at a scale the world has not matched yet. Kenya now generates roughly half of its electricity from heat pulled out of the Rift Valley, putting Kenya in rare company globally alongside Iceland and New Zealand. Eskom, South Africa's state utility, is restructuring around tens of gigawatts of new wind and solar. The same company that was the global symbol of grid failure 5 years ago, now the symbol of transition. The process is messy and politically complicated, but the direction is real. The honest reading is this. The current generation of African energy access, the M-KOPA generation, the Sun King generation, is a hybrid structure: foreign capital, African labor, African customers, foreign ownership. It's the structure that could have raised the money required given the pool of capital that existed a decade ago. The next generation is already being built differently. Salfa, Arnergy, RenSource, and dozens like them are being funded by African venture capital, African corporates, and African development finance. The wealth from their eventual exits will stay closer to home. The data sets will be African owned. The strategic decisions will get made in Lagos and Nairobi and Cape Town instead of London and San Francisco. That's the shift underway. And it's the story we care most about. The bets that don't get covered. 3 more stories worth pulling out specifically, because they're the kind of bets that don't get covered until they become obvious. Morocco's Noor Ouarzazate solar complex, one of the largest concentrated power facilities in the world. Concentrated solar power is the technology that uses mirrors to focus sunlight in a central tower, generating heat that runs turbines and can store energy for hours after the sun sets. Noor Ouarzazate has been online for years, and it's positioned Morocco as one of the leading countries on Earth in this specific renewable energy category. The country is now in advanced discussions on the X-Links project, a submarine cable that would export Moroccan solar energy directly to the United Kingdom. African renewable energy sold to the European grid, that's the kind of deal that flips historic energy trade relationships. Kenya's geothermal scale. Kenya is one of the most geothermally rich countries on Earth. The Rift Valley sits on enormous geological heat reserves. KenGen has been building out geothermal aggressively for 2 decades. Kenya now generates roughly half of its electricity from geothermal sources. That puts Kenya in a rare company globally, alongside Iceland and parts of New Zealand, as one of the only countries on Earth running its grid primarily on heat pulled from the ground. Egypt's Banben Solar Park, one of the largest solar installations on the planet in the Aswan Desert, built primarily by Egyptian state and private actors with international project finance. It's been generating at multi-gigawatt scale for years, and it's still scaling up. The pattern across all 3 is the same. African countries with specific natural advantages are building specialized renewable assets that exceed what anyone else in a category has done. Concentrated solar, geothermal, desert-scale solar. These aren't experiments. They're benchmarks. Where it doesn't add up yet. Now, here's the hard part of this episode. The renewable build-out is real. The numbers are real. But the demand picture is racing ahead of the supply picture. And the gap is widening in places before it narrows. 3 problems worth being honest about. 1, the grid itself. Adding generation capacity is only half of the equation. You also need transmission lines to carry that electricity from where it's generated to where it's consumed. and distribution networks to get it to the last mile. African transmission infrastructure is in most countries the bottleneck. South Africa's grid stress has been the headline case, but Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, and others all face transmission constraints. New generation without new transmission means stranded power. Solar farms producing electricity that can't get to the data centers and the factories that need it. 2. The data center demand curve. Every AI factory we covered in episode 2 needs power that scales linearly with the workload. The cassava deployment in South Africa is sized into existing grid capacity. The next 12,000 GPUs coming to Egypt, Kenya, and Morocco, Nigeria will need power additions that don't exist yet. The renewable build is impressive in absolute terms, but the AI demand is still too slow. 3. Capital concentration. Most of the financing for the large renewable project is coming from a small handful of development finance institutions and a few global lenders. That's not stable foundation for a multi-decade build. African capital markets need to develop the depth to fund at scale, and that's still a multi-year project. Several African pension funds and sovereign wealth funds are starting to deploy into renewable infrastructure, which is the right direction, but the pace needs to accelerate. The honest read. The African renewable build-out is still the most impressive on Earth in percentage terms, but it's not yet on pace to fully meet the demand of the AI and EV build-out. The next 5 years are the race. African policy and capital need to compound on what's already been built. This is the exact question that I want to hear back on. If you're working in African energy at one of these companies, at a development finance institution, at a national utility, in a regulator's office, in a fund, drop a comment with what I got right and what I got wrong on YouTube, Spotify, and LinkedIn. The point of this show is to track the build together, not just lecture. Tell me what you're seeing. Your move. 3 things you can do this week, and one for the founders in the fight. 1. Become a customer of the build if you can. Sun King and M-KOPA both have ways to sponsor solar home systems for off-grid families, sometimes as a one-off purchase, sometimes through partner programs. $200 puts a working solar system in a home that didn't have one. It's the rare call to action where the dollar and the impact are roughly the same number. Links in the show notes. 2. Watch the energy operators in public markets. KenGen trades on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. Several South African renewable players are accessible via the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Both exchanges accept international investors with reasonable friction. African renewable energy stopped being the charitable pitch some time ago. It's an investment category with operating businesses, growing customer bases, and real cash flow. Treat it that way. 3. If you build for a living, software, hardware, operations, project finance, these companies are hiring openly. The 11.3 gigawatt year doesn't happen without people to build, run, finance, and maintain these systems. M-KOPA, Sun King, BBOXX, Husk, KenGen all have career pages with open roles right now, in Africa and remote. The continent's energy build-out is being staffed in real time. You can be part of that staffing. And one more. If you're an African native founded energy company grinding to close your next round, keep going. The capital pool that would have shut you 5 years ago is genuinely changing. African VCs like Launch Africa, Renew Capital, All On, Novstar, and P1 Ventures are actively writing checks. Africa 50, the African Development Bank, and growing sets of African sovereign wealth funds are deploying into energy infrastructure. Ghana's pension fund is now required to allocate to VC and private equity, and other countries are following. The money you couldn't access is now for the first time coming home. Keep pitching, keep building. The story of the next decade of African energy has your name on it. The last thing for Native Africans and for the African diaspora everywhere. The system excluded you. You didn't have access. You were overlooked. And the value was always somewhere across, outside, or in someone else's hands. That was real. And it still shapes some of the day-to-day of anyone building on the continent or investing from abroad. Those conditions are genuinely shifting now. Not fully and not evenly, but for the first time in a long time, they are moving in your direction. Capital is coming home. Ownership is coming home. Decisions are coming home. Stay tuned to Mbuni. We'll keep you in the loop, and we'll keep you informed on what's opening up for you. Here's the thing about energy that's easy to miss. A continent that imports its energy stays exposed. A continent that generates its own energy gets to set its own terms. The renewable buildout isn't just about kilowatts, it's about sovereignty. The grid that powers African AI, African EVs, African manufacturing, and African daily life, that grid is for the first time being built primarily by African companies using African resources and African policy terms. That's the modern age this show was named for. If this episode landed, share it with one person, especially anyone still telling the story of Africa's energy poor. The Mbuni Signal newsletter goes out every week, tracking the build in real time. Sign up at mbuni.space. Next episode, we leave the grid and follow the wires under the ocean. Africa's subsea cable buildout, the fiber optic backbone that makes everything we cover on this show physically possible, drops next week. I'm Jennifer, and this is Mbuni, Africa in the Modern Age.
Welcome to the Central Nexus. The train arriving is bound for the Northern Spire. Please stand clear of the doors.
Look up there, isn't that incredible?
It's beautiful.
Satellite trajectory holding steady over the Zambezi tracking station.
Confirmed. Atmospheric distortion minimum. Now, zoom in on the cellular structure of the heart.
We must ensure the balance between neurons. These maps show the power of the system in the future for all. Africa.